Hello and welcome to this latest installment of Marketplace Tech's limited series, Decoding Democracy, where we're talking about misinformation and disinformation in the 2024 election. I'm your host, Lily Jamali. Today, I'm joined once again by Marketplace's senior Washington correspondent, Kimberly Adams. Great to see you, Kimberly.
Nice to see you too, Lily.
So our focus today is how we talk to our friends and family about misinformation, some pretty fraught stuff. We have a great show planned, though. As part of this, we have been collecting questions from our colleagues here at Marketplace, and we're going to be putting them to an expert later in the show. So, Kimberly, listen, we are now less than 6 months away from Election Day, if you can believe it. And one of the things we want to talk about today is how we can all be change agents of sorts, whether it's in our families, in our group of friends, in our communities. But in order to do that, to have these difficult conversations about misinformation, we have to understand the problem of it and how it spreads.
Exactly. It's such a huge issue and can be so emotionally fraught. Like, nobody likes to see anyone wrong on the internet, much less wrong in your own friends and family circle. But misinformation can take so many different shapes and forms. And there was a 2018 study in the journal Science that found that lies spread faster than the truth on social media. So finding ways to connect our personal and in-person networks to connect to those folks and also to talk to them about misinformation in a way that they can hear it, that hopefully sustains those relationships, is super important, especially since social media is such a big part of many of our daily lives. And there's a lot of data to back this up. Research shows that people are more likely to change their point of view when they get new information from someone that they care about, somebody in their own network, especially if you usually agree with them on other things. So somebody who goes to your church, you're already in a space where you're agreeing on certain things. They're more likely to hear from you a challenge to something that they might believe, some conspiracy theory, than some stranger on the street or you and I on the internet in a news program or something like that. So when it comes to addressing and hopefully debunking mis and disinformation, talking with the people in your own circle is a much better place to start than sort of yelling at somebody you don't agree with on the internet.
As fun as that may be.
As fun as it may be.
I do want to just remind folks of the stakes of this as we get deeper into our conversation. There was a great report out from the Brookings Institution all about how misinformation is eroding public confidence in democracy. The implications of this trend are huge, they write. Decreased confidence in the system decreases civic engagement. So they actually cited this Howard University survey where they asked respondents, do you believe that your vote really counts? 26% of respondents, a pretty high number, believe that their vote did not count. So you can see how this can feed back into whether people vote or not. And, talking about all this stuff with your friends and family, yes, we know it's not easy. We have all been there. And it's especially difficult in an election context. But there you do have that reminder of the stakes. And this is also an election where voters might have one or two issues that's really the deciding factor for them. I'm thinking about topics like abortion, like inflation, like Israel's war in Gaza. Consuming falsehoods on topics like that can change how people vote. So this is just so important.
And that example of whether or not someone's vote matters or vote counts is really important because there's a classic example of a narrative that has some germs of truth to it. True, people's individual votes in terms of their overall power relative to population, it's different depending on where you are in the country. If you are a Republican voting in a Republican primary in a solidly blue district, your vote is not going to carry as much weight as if you were in a more contested district. And so people can pick and choose details. But if you're having a conversation with someone about whether their vote matters, you can pivot that conversation to why they think you might think voting is important and what change you can make, even if you do live in a place where the power of your individual vote might be diluted. And it's very difficult to take those things that are hard truths to accept and then leverage that into a conversation that can hopefully elicit some positive change.
Yeah. Well, Being the local news reporter that I am at heart, I got to mention those down ballot races. Those count too. It's not just the
Exactly.
presidential.
Exactly.
So, so please get out there and vote. All right. Knowing that these conversations can be hard, we have called in some experts for tips on all of this. We gathered questions from colleagues, our colleagues here at Marketplace that we'll be talking about in a moment. In fact, let's actually go to our first question, which reads as follows. I have a loved one who gets their news solely from very extremist and polarizing sources that stretch the truth. This is sounding very familiar to me. How might I start a constructive conversation with them about the problem with this news source? And for answers, let's go to Pamela Brunskill. She is Senior Director of Education Design at the News Literacy Project.
To start, I would begin with something like, hey, I know you like so-and-so source. Can I ask you why? What about it resonates with you? Then they'll tell you why, and it might have something to do with, well, I trust it and I can't trust these other sources. And so then that brings up a question of something like, do you ever wonder if what you're getting from that source is credible? How do you know? I have seen coverage from other sources that strikes me as different but important. Can I share them with you? And then you get into sharing the different coverage, and hopefully, or ideally, you would navigate into a conversation about the ethics of reporting and standards of quality journalism.
So, Kimberly, can I just say I deeply dislike confrontation. I do not relish these conversations. I'm probably not alone, but you have to have these conversations. And I find that I'm having them more than ever now. I find my receptivity to them is more important now because I understand the stakes. And that applies to relatives, that applies to friends, as well as sources who I don't normally talk politics with. But I have found that people are receptive when you present them with data and evidence. What have you found works?
I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that you don't like confrontation, but you're having more conversations. And I think that's the key right there, is that you have to approach these interactions as conversations and not confrontations. And I find that when you genuinely go to somebody with a learning perspective, asking them questions, why do you believe that? Why do you trust that source? Can you show me their ethics policy? Because reputable news organizations will have an ethics policy and be very transparent about how they go about their reporting. Some other experts recommend, suggesting that people talk about the incentives. Why do you think and who do you think benefits from you believing this? And this person that you trust, where are they getting their funding from? What incentives do they have to perpetuate this particular narrative? Do you think that makes it fair? Does that change when you think about that funding source or those incentive models? Does that change the way you think about what you're hearing from them? Because, if you or I at Marketplace or at any other, big news organization were to say something false and not correct it, or say something that perpetuates a false narrative without context, we could lose our jobs. That's one of our many incentives to tell the truth, including, hopefully our own personal ethics and morals. But we will lose our employment if we are consistently wrong or consistently spouting falsehoods. Is that the case for this other source? And having an open, genuine, questioning conversation about that from a spirit of wanting to reach a common ground with someone, I feel is a much better way to go about it than challenging someone like, you're so dumb for believing this. How could you fall for this? This person that you say that you trust is garbage, or they're so biased. That doesn't help anything.
Right. And it can totally backfire if you are trying to have that constructive conversation. Let's go to our second question, which is a follow-up to the one about having a constructive conversation on the credibility or lack thereof of certain news sources. What if they're still not convinced? And for an answer to that one, we go to Letitia Bodie. She is professor of communication, culture, and technology at Georgetown.
It's unreasonable to think that you would completely change the way that people think about information or the way they think about the sources they rely on in a single conversation. Most people on most issues are somewhere in the middle when it comes to like something that they 100% agree with or 100% disagree with. Most people haven't spent that much time thinking about a particular issue. They don't have really strong, solid views on it. So even moving them just a couple of degrees on, if you think of it as like a 100-degree thermometer, right? If you move them from a 37 to a 38, that's going to feel very unsatisfying in the moment. But over time, eventually, if you change 1 degree every day, eventually you turn from winter to summer.
I love that. Play the long game. The News Literacy Project, the folks there talk about being patient, but also having empathy. And there's persistence as a part of this too. You might have known someone for a long time. There's trust there that's already baked into that relationship. I think people engage with us sometimes on these issues actually because they're looking for help.
I really like the acronym that the News Literacy Project uses to remind people how to approach this: patience, empathy, and persistence. PEP. It's a pep talk. You come to somebody with that patience to know that you're having a conversation that maybe will last 10 or 15 minutes. They've probably spent hours online in communities that are affirming these narratives, and you're coming to them without hearing what they've heard and trying to change their mind. So be patient and humble to know that you don't know everything they've encountered or the narratives that they've heard, or that they may have been affirmed in their own spaces with these false narratives. And then be empathetic in that regard, that, okay, I totally get why you might think that if this is the space that you've been in, but then be persistent. Tell me again where these folks are getting that information. Tell me again why you feel that this person on the internet with no credentials, who you really don't know where they're getting their funding from, is a more reputable source than, say, this congressional hearing where experts in the field, answered questions about this, or when the key players who were involved actually said these words, and be persistent and be aware that it's going to take more than one conversation. And if you want to have a second conversation and not be shut out after the first one, you do have to approach those things with humility.
Yeah, I think a little humility goes a long way. I don't want that point to get lost. It's super important. Kimberly, thank you for all the great insights. It's been really great to chat with you about all this.
Likewise, Lily.
That was Kimberly Adams, Marketplace's senior Washington correspondent. Thanks to all of you for joining us for another episode of Decoding Democracy. New episodes drop bi-weekly on Tuesdays. If you have questions about talking to people in your life about misinformation, we want to hear from you. So please leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Rosie Hughes produced this episode, and I'm Lily Jamali.